Tonight we wake before dawn in ancient Carthage, the city still clinging to the last threads of darkness as you swing your feet onto a cool clay floor. The air through your window carries salt from the harbor and something else. Something thick and sweet that you'll come to know as intimately as your own breathing over the coming weeks. You pull on a simple tunic, the linen ruff against skin still warm from sleep, and you step outside just as the first pale light touches the summit of Bursa Hill. The city below you isn't the ruin that tourists photograph today, all broken columns and scattered stones. This is Carthage alive, Carthage breathing, Carthage stretching after a night of dreams. And you're about to walk into its oldest rhythm, the slow, sun-drenched process of turning fresh figs into something that will outlast empires. You probably won't survive this, obviously, but the figs will. They'll outlive you, your children, your children's children, and quite possibly the entire civilization that's currently yawning and rubbing its eyes around you. That's the thing about drying figures. They are not in a hurry. They have time. They have all the time in the world, which is more than anyone in ancient Carthage can say. Given that the Romans are still sharpening their swords just across the water, waiting for an excuse to turn this whole experiment in Phoenician ambition into a salt-scoured memory. But that's later. Much later. Right now. The only enemy is yesterday's fruit still hanging on the trees, softening past its prime while you were sleeping. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're just here for the figs, well, I understand. Figs are compelling. They are patient teachers. They'll wait while you figure out which button does what. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step away from your doorway and the city spreads beneath you like a map drawn in white stone and red earth. 3-story houses crowd the hillside, their flat roofs catching the earliest light while the narrow streets below remain in shadow. You hear the first donkey of morning complaining about something. Donkeys always have something to complain about. And somewhere a woman's voice calls out, sharp and musical, rousing children who'd rather stay buried in their sleeping mats. The air cools your face despite the heat that's coming. You already know about that heat. You've felt it before. The way it presses down on Carthage from late spring through autumn, turning afternoons into exercises in strategic immobility. But today you're not hiding from it. Today you're walking straight into it, because the figs are ready, and the figs do not wait for anyone. You make your way down the sloping street, your bare feet finding the familiar places where stone has been worn smooth by generations before you. The houses press close on either side, their walls painted white to reflect the sun that hasn't yet climbed high enough to matter. Through open doorways you catch glimpses of interiors, a cooking fire being coaxed back to life, a grandmother braiding her granddaughter's hair, a man buckling on a leather sandal while balancing against a door frame. These are the small rituals of mourning, repeated thousands of times across the city, and you move through them like a ghost, already half detached from domestic life. You're headed for the orchards. You're headed for the figs. At the bottom of the hill the street widens and you join a slow trickle of people moving in the same direction. Most carry empty baskets balanced on their heads or tucked under their arms. Some lead donkeys loaded with woven panniers that sway with each step. You fall into step beside a woman whose face you recognize from past harvests, deeply tanned, creased around the eyes from years of squinting into bright light, missing 2 teeth on the left side when she smiles, which she does now, briefly, acknowledging you without words. There's no need for conversation at this hour. The shared destination is enough. You're all going to the same place, and you'll talk plenty once the work begins, trading gossip and complaints across the rows of fruit. For now, silence is the appropriate clothing for the approach. The path leads you past the great cisterns where water from the Zaghuan aqueduct gathers in underground chambers cool as tombs. You hear it before you see it, That particular sound of water moving through stone, dripping and echoing, suggesting depths that your eyes can't penetrate. A boy dips a clay pot into an opening and drinks deeply, water running down his chin. And for a moment you consider doing the same. But you're already late. The figs are waiting. You push on, leaving the cisterns behind. And the ground begins to rise again as you climb toward the agricultural terraces that step up the hillsides like enormous stairs. The city falls away behind you. The houses become sparser, then disappear entirely, replaced by olive groves and vegetable plots, and finally, as you round a rocky outcropping, the fig orchards come into view. They spread across the hillside in disciplined rows, their broad leaves catching the morning light and throwing it back in shifting patterns of green and silver. The trees are old. Some were planted before anyone living was born, their trunks twisted and gnarled, their branches spreading wide as if trying to embrace the space around them. And hanging from those branches, heavy enough to pull them toward the ground, are thousands upon thousands of figs. They are not the figs you know from supermarkets. Those are bred for shipping, for shelf life, for the appearance of ripeness without the reality. These figs are something else entirely. They are purple so deep it's almost black, green so pale it's almost white, brown streaked with gold where the sun has kissed them longest. Some have split open at the bottom, their pink interiors visible through the cracks, weeping droplets of sugary syrup that attract wasps already beginning to stir in the warming air. You stand at the edge of the orchard and you breathe in, and the scent fills your head like wine, fermenting, intoxicating, promising the sweetness that will only intensify as the days pass and the water inside these fruits slowly, patiently, disappears. You walk through terraced groves where twisted branches heavy with fruit soak up the Mediterranean sun. And already the light has shifted from the soft gold of dawn to something more insistent, more demanding. The trees stand in rows that follow the contour of the hill, each terrace held in place by stone walls built so long ago that the mortar has crumbled and the rocks have settled into a kind of permanent embrace, lichen spreading across their surfaces in orange and gray patches. You run your hand along one of these walls as you pass, feeling the warmth that has already begun to accumulate in the stone, and you think about the hands that placed each rock: Canaanite hands, Phoenician hands, Carthaginian hands, a chain of ownership that stretches back centuries before you drew your first breath. The figs don't care about any of this. The figs are doing what figs have always done, which is to hang there and get sweeter while civilizations rise and fall around them. Above you, the aqueduct marches across the landscape on massive stone arches, bringing water from the mountains 50 miles away. You can hear it too, if you stop and listen. A distant murmur, like wind through pines, that never quite stops. The Romans will marvel at this aqueduct someday, after they've conquered the city and salted the earth and tried to pretend Carthage never existed. They'll write about it in their histories, claiming it as evidence of their own engineering genius once they've rebuilt it to serve their new colony. But right now it's Carthaginian water flowing through Carthaginian stone toward Carthaginian cisterns, and some of it spills onto these terraces through channels so small you'd miss them if you weren't looking. The figs drink deeply, swelling in the night, then spend their days concentrating that water into sugar under the hammer of the sun. You stop beside a particular tree that you've claimed as your own over the years. Not that anyone recognizes ownership of individual trees, but there's an understanding among the pickers that certain trees suit certain people. This one stands slightly apart from its neighbors, its trunk splitting into 3 main branches at waist height, creating a natural seat where you can rest while you work. The figs here are mostly the variety called bitter by the people who tend them. Purple-black skin, deep red flesh, a flavor that balances honey with something almost like raspberry. You reach up and touch one, gently, not picking it yet. The skin gives slightly under your finger, soft but not mushy, and you can feel the weight of it, heavy with the moisture that will soon be coaxed away. A voice calls out from further up the terrace, and you look to see the overseer, a man named Bodmelkart, which is a lot of name for someone whose job mostly involves standing in the shade and telling other people where to stand in the sun. He's gesturing toward the eastern end of the grove, where the figs have ripened earliest thanks to the angle of the light. You nod and begin walking, passing between trees so laden that you have to duck under branches that hang low enough to brush the top of your head. The leaves rustle against your skin, rough and fragrant, releasing that particular fig leaf scent. Green, slightly medicinal, nothing like the fruit itself. As you walk, you notice the other signs of life that share these terraces. Lizards dart across the warm stones, stopping to do their tiny push-ups before vanishing into cracks. A snake slides through the grass at the base of a wall, disappearing before you can tell whether it's one of the harmless ones or the kind that makes your arm swell up like a water skin. The overseer claims there are no dangerous snakes in the orchards, but the overseer also claims he once wrestled a lion, so you take his assurances with a generous pinch of salt. You step a little higher anyway, just in case. The terraces extend further than you can easily see, folding around the contours of the hills in a way that suggests the original builders cared more about catching every possible ray of sunlight than about making the layout simple to navigate. Some terraces face south, baking in the most intense heat. Others angle southeast or southwest, catching gentler light that ripens the fruit more slowly. The farmers who planted these groves centuries ago understood something that modern agriculture sometimes forgets: that the sun doesn't strike the earth evenly, and that the best harvest comes from working with these variations rather than trying to flatten them into uniformity. Figs from the hot southern terraces will dry fastest, their sugars concentrated by the fierce afternoon rays. Figs from the gentler slopes will take longer, developing more complex flavors as they hang there day after day, slowly accumulating sweetness. Historians still argue whether the Carthaginians deliberately planted different fig varieties on different exposures, or whether the current arrangement simply reflects centuries of accretion, each generation adding trees where space allowed. You look at the pattern of the groves and you can see evidence for both theories. Some sections so orderly they must have been planned, others chaotic in a way that suggests someone just stuck cuttings in the ground wherever there happened to be room. The figs themselves don't care about the debate. They are too busy photosynthesizing, pulling energy from the sun and moisture from the earth, transforming it all into the sticky abundance that will soon fill your baskets. A woman passes you going the other way, already returning to the city with her first load. Her basket overflows with figs so dark they are almost blue in this light, and she walks carefully, one hand steadying the load on her head, her bare feet finding the familiar path without apparent thought. She's singing quietly, a tune you don't recognize, and the sound mingles with the drone of insects beginning to stir as the day warms. You watch her until she disappears around a bend, and then you turn back to your own work, finding the tree where you'll begin. This particular tree has been here longer than anyone remembers. Its trunk is thicker than your body, its bark rough and knotted, and it produces figs that are smaller than those on younger trees but sweeter, more concentrated, as if age has taught it exactly how much flavor can be packed into each fruit. You run your fingers over the bark, feeling the texture, and you think about all the hands that have touched this same tree. Carthaginians going about their lives, picking figs and eating them fresh, drying them for winter, trading them for pottery and cloth and metal. The tree was old when your great-grandmother was young. It will still be here, probably, long after you're gone, dropping its fruit each year for someone else to gather. You reach for the first fig of the day. Your fingers close around it gently, feeling the slight give of the skin, the weight of it, the way the stem attaches to the branch. You twist, not pull. Pulling damages the tree, breaks the little spur that might produce next year's fruit. The fig comes away cleanly in your hand, leaving a drop of white latex on the stem, sticky and mildly irritating to skin that isn't calloused enough. You hold it up to the light, turning it slowly, admiring the way the purple skin shades almost to black at the bottom where the sun has hit it hardest. A tiny crack has opened near the eye, and through it you can see a hint of the red flesh inside, glistening with moisture. You could eat it now. No one would blame you. Everyone tastes the first few, checking the sweetness, calibrating their expectations for the harvest to come. You bring it to your nose first, inhaling that complex scent that's part honey, part berry, part something else entirely that doesn't have a name. Then you bite into it, just the tip, letting the flesh touch your tongue before you commit. The flavor floods your mouth, intense, almost overwhelming in its sweetness, with undertones of something darker, almost wine-like, that speaks of afternoons soaking up sun and nights drinking from the moisture that condenses on the leaves. You close your eyes and you taste Carthage itself, the whole city distilled into this one small fruit. You learn to read the fig's subtle signals, the droop of the stem, the crackle of the skin, to know when harvest must begin. And you quickly realize that this knowledge separates those who've spent their lives in the orchards from those who merely visit. The overseer Bodmelkart has it, this ability to scan a tree and know within a handful of figs whether the whole thing is ready. The women who've been picking since childhood have it, their hands moving almost without guidance toward the fruits that are perfectly ripe while bypassing those that need another day or two. You do not have it yet. Not really. But you're learning. And the trees are patient teachers even when your mistakes cost them a few fruits that fall and split on the hard ground below. You stand before a branch loaded with perhaps 30 figs, and you try to see what Bodmelkart sees. Some of the figs hang downward, heavy with their own weight, their stems bent at an angle that suggests they are ready to let go. Others point more toward the sky, still firm, still holding themselves upright as if they haven't yet surrendered to the pull of gravity. The skin of the ready figs has lost its powdery bloom, that natural coating that protects the fruit from sun and insects, and in its place you see a certain shine, a slickness that speaks of sugars rising to the surface. When you gently squeeze one between thumb and finger, not hard enough to damage, just enough to test, you feel a slight give, like a water skin that's full but not quite bursting. The underripe ones resist your pressure. The overripe ones collapse too easily, their flesh already beginning to ferment inside the thin skin. You pick one that seems right, and as you twist it from the stem you hear a sound so faint you might imagine it, a tiny crackling, like the first spark of a fire, as the skin separates from the stem. This is the signal you've been taught to listen for, the fig's final communication before it leaves the tree forever. If you pick too early, there's no crackle, just a clean break that leaves a dry stem end. If you pick too late, the crackle becomes a tear, the skin splitting in ways that invite wasps and rot before the fruit ever reaches the drying ground. But at the perfect moment, that tiny sound tells you everything you need to know. This fig is ready to begin its transformation. The morning unfolds around you in the rhythms of harvest. You work your way around your chosen tree, reaching into the dense foliage where figs hide from the direct sun, careful not to break the branches that will bear next year's crop. Your basket fills slowly at first, then more quickly as you find your pace, as your eye learns to pick the ready figs from among the ones that need more time. The work requires constant attention. You can't let your mind wander too far, or you'll find yourself staring at a branch without actually seeing the fruits on it, your hands still moving but your judgment gone. And yet the attention isn't the kind that exhausts you, the kind that leaves you drained at midday. It's more like a gentle focus, a meditation on purple and green and the exact texture of skin against your fingertips. You notice that the wasps have begun to arrive, drawn by the sweetness of fruits that have cracked open on the tree. They are not aggressive, these wasps, too focused on the feast to bother with you, but their presence adds an edge to the work, A reminder that you're competing with the rest of the natural world for these figures. The orchard supports an entire ecosystem of creatures who've figured out that figs mean food. And they're not about to let a few humans with baskets claim exclusive rights. Birds dart through the branches, taking quick bites from the ripest fruits. Ants parade in columns up and down the trunks, carrying away tiny fragments. Even the lizards, you notice, have figured out that fallen figs provide a meal, though they seem to prefer the insects drawn to the fermenting flesh rather than the fruit itself. Historians still argue whether the ancient Carthaginians cultivated specific fig varieties or simply propagated whatever grew best in the local conditions. You look around at the diversity of trees on this single hillside and you can see why the question remains unresolved. Some trees bear figs that are almost round, purple, black, and glossy, splitting open to reveal flesh so dark red it's nearly brown. Others produce fruits that are longer, more tapered, green even when fully ripe, with pink interiors that taste noticeably different, lighter, brighter, more floral. Still others offer figs that fall somewhere between these extremes, their characteristics blending in ways that suggest accidental cross-pollination rather than deliberate breeding. The orchard is less a plantation than a conversation among fig varieties, each expressing itself slightly differently while all participating in the same basic project of turning sunlight into sweetness. By mid-morning your basket holds perhaps 10 pounds of figs, and your arms are streaked with the sticky latex that seeps from the stems. This latex has its uses. Mixed with other ingredients it forms a sort of natural glue, and some say it can soften calluses or even help with certain skin complaints. But right now it's mostly just annoying, coating your hands in a film that attracts dust and makes it harder to grip the next figure. You wipe your hands on your tunic, which only spreads the stickiness to new areas, and you keep working because the figs won't wait while you solve the problem of personal hygiene in an ancient orchard. The sun climbs higher and the temperature rises with it, the air growing thick with the scent of ripening fruit. You've learned to drink water regularly, taking sips from the clay jug left in the shade of a particular tree, because the combination of heat and physical labor can sneak up on you, leaving you dizzy before you realize how thirsty you've become. The older pickers move more slowly now, conserving energy for the hours still ahead, and you follow their example, settling into a rhythm that you could maintain all day without collapsing. This is another thing the figs teach you: patience, steadiness, the wisdom of not rushing toward a finish line that keeps moving further away. You encounter a branch so laden that the figs press against each other, their skins touching, some of them deforming slightly under the pressure of their neighbors. This is both blessing and challenge. More fruit to pick, but also more risk of damage, because figs that have been pressed together during growth may have weak spots where rot can enter once they are separated. You work carefully around this branch, lifting each fig to check the hidden side before deciding whether to pick it or leave it. Several show the dark spots of incipient decay, and you leave those for the wasps and the birds, who don't mind a little fermentation in their meal. A girl of perhaps 10 years passes near you, her own basket already full, and she glances at your technique with the casual assessment of someone who's been doing this since she could walk. You see her slight frown at the way you handle a particularly delicate fig, and you adjust your grip without needing to be told. The child moves on, satisfied that you're not entirely hopeless, and you feel oddly proud of this silent approval from someone young enough to be your daughter. The orchard has its own hierarchies, and they don't always align with age. The figs you're picking today will not be eaten fresh. Some will, of course. There's always a certain amount that never makes it to the drying ground, consumed by pickers and their families and anyone else who happens to pass through with an appetite. But the vast majority are destined for transformation, for the slow concentration that turns a perishable fruit into something that can survive months of storage and voyages across the sea. Each fig you place in your basket carries within it the potential for that future, the sugars that will darken and deepen, the water that will slowly escape, the texture that will shift from juicy to chewy to something almost like candy. You're not just harvesting fruit. You're harvesting time itself, capturing the essence of this Mediterranean summer and preserving it against the winter to come. You join the pickers at first light, filling woven palm baskets while your fingers grow sticky with sweet latex. And by the time the sun has cleared the top of Bursa Hill, you've learned that harvesting figs is less about speed than about touch, about the constant conversation between your hand and the fruit. The baskets themselves deserve attention. They are not the mass-produced containers you might imagine, but individual creations, each one woven by someone who understood that the right basket can make the difference between fruit that arrives intact and fruit that arrives as mush. Palm fronds, split and softened, then coiled and stitched with fibers from the same trees, produce containers that breathe, that give slightly when bumped, that cushion the figs against each other without trapping moisture that would start them rotting before they ever reach the drying ground. You've been given a basket that's seen seasons of use, its edges darkened with the residue of countless harvests, and you hold it against your hip as you work, using your body to steady it while both hands reach for the next figure. This position, slightly twisted, one shoulder lower than the other, will become familiar over the coming days, will settle into your muscles until you adopt it automatically whenever you're near a laden tree. The basket fills and you shift its weight, feeling the figs settle against each other, and you're careful not to pack them too tightly because bruised figs are ruined figs, their skins broken, their flesh exposed to the insects and the air. Around you, the orchard has come fully alive with the business of harvest. Pickers dot the terraces like figures in a painting, some standing to reach high branches, others kneeling to access the lower ones where the largest fruits often hide. Conversation flows between them, carried on the morning air in the Punic language that sounds nothing like Latin or Greek, full of guttural stops and vowels that seem to come from deep in the throat. You catch fragments, complaints about a husband who drinks too much, observations about a daughter's upcoming marriage, speculation about whether the Roman ships gathering off Sicily mean anything for the price of figs this season. The ordinary talk of ordinary people, made strange only by the language and the setting. A woman near you straightens up and stretches her back with a sound that's half groan, half sigh. She's old enough that her hair has gone completely white, though her arms are still strong, still capable of the precise movements that harvest requires. She catches your eye and smiles, then gestures toward a branch loaded with particularly large figs, indicating that you should take them. You nod your thanks and move toward the branch, and as you pass she says something in Punic that you don't quite catch, though the tone suggests it might be a joke at your expense. The other pickers nearby laugh, confirming your suspicion, and you laugh too because it's easier than explaining that you barely understand the language and definitely don't understand jokes delivered at conversational speed in an agricultural setting. The figs on this branch are the variety the locals call Numidian. Pale green even when ripe, with flesh the color of honey and a sweetness that's almost cloying when eaten fresh. They are less common than the purple varieties, more finicky about growing conditions, and they command higher prices at market because some people prefer their lighter flavor. You pick them carefully, noting how their skin feels different against your fingers. Smoother, almost waxy, with less of that crackling sound when you twist them from the stem. These figs will dry to a translucent amber, beautiful to look at and intensely sweet, though you personally prefer the darker ones with their hints of berry and wine. By now your hands have accumulated a thick coating of latex, the sticky sap that seeps from every broken stem. It's begun to attract dust from the air, giving your skin a grayish cast, and you've given up trying to keep it off your tunic. The older pickers seem less bothered by this. Their hands are so callous that the latex barely adheres, forming beads that roll off rather than spreading into a film. You envy this, along with their ability to work through the morning without stopping to stretch, without the small aches that have already begun to accumulate in your shoulders and back. A man passes with a donkey loaded down by two enormous baskets, each one overflowing with figs destined for the city markets rather than the drying grounds. Fresh figs have their own season, their own brief window of perfection, and the city dwellers who don't have orchards of their own are willing to pay good money for fruit picked that morning. The donkey picks its way carefully down the terraced path, its hooves finding secure footing on stones worn smooth by centuries of similar journeys, and you watch until it disappears around the bend, the sound of its bells fading into the general murmur of the harvest. The sun continues its climb and the heat intensifies, pressing down on the orchard like a physical weight. You've learned to work in the shade when possible, reaching into the dense foliage where the figs hide from the direct rays, and you've also learned that the shade has limits, that eventually you have to step into the full sun to reach the high branches or the outer portions of the canopy. When you do, the heat hits you like something solid, like walking into a wall of warmth that steals your breath for a moment before you adjust. Your skin prickles and you feel sweat gathering in all the usual places, running down your back, soaking the linen of your tunic until it clings to your body like a second skin. A child runs past, too young to be much help with picking but old enough to carry water, and you take the opportunity to drink deeply from the clay jug she offers. The water is warm, having sat in the sun for hours, but it's still water, still life-giving, still enough to keep you going through the morning. You pour a little over your hands, trying to wash away some of the latex, but water alone won't touch it. You'll need oil later, at the end of the day, to dissolve the sticky residue and restore your skin to something approaching normal. The basket at your hip has grown heavy, and you realize you've filled it without quite noticing the transition from empty to full. You shift it to your other hip, testing the weight, and decide it's time to transfer your harvest to one of the larger collection baskets positioned at intervals through the orchard. You make your way toward the nearest one, stepping carefully between trees, and when you reach it you gently tip your figs in, watching them tumble into the pile with that soft, heavy sound that ripe fruit makes when it meets other ripe fruit. The collection basket is enormous, woven on a scale that required multiple people to create, reinforced with wooden stays along its sides, capable of holding perhaps 200 pounds of figs when full. It's barely a quarter full now, but by day's end it will be overflowing, and donkeys will carry it down to the drying grounds where the real work begins. You stand for a moment, looking at the accumulating harvest, feeling the small satisfaction of having contributed to this pile, this evidence of labor transformed into food. Then you turn back toward the trees, because the morning is still young and there are figs waiting, always more figs, an endless succession of fruits that must be picked before they pass their perfect moment. The orchard stretches out before you, green and silver and purple, and you walk back into it without hesitation, already reaching for the next branch, the next fig, the next small decision about readiness and ripeness and the exact moment when fruit becomes harvest. You carry the loaded baskets down dusty paths toward the flat stone beds where the real transformation will happen, and each step sends small shocks through your arms and shoulders as the weight shifts and settles. The path from orchard to drying ground isn't long, perhaps half a mile, winding between terraces and through a shallow valley where wild herbs grow in fragrant patches, but it feels longer when you're carrying 40 pounds of figs balanced on your head or braced against your hip. You've chosen the head method, following the example of the women who've been doing this since childhood, and you've learned that the trick is not to fight the weight but to let it settle into your spine, to become part of you for the duration of the walk. The basket rests on a coiled pad of woven grass that cushions your scalp and helps distribute the load. You walk slowly, deliberately, your bare feet finding the path by memory while your eyes stay fixed on the horizon ahead. The figs shift slightly with each step, their weight moving in ways that require constant tiny adjustments from your neck and shoulders. It's exhausting in a way that running or lifting isn't, a sustained, low-grade demand on muscles you didn't know you had, a test of endurance rather than strength. Around you, Other carriers make the same journey, some with baskets on their heads, others with loads balanced on their shoulders or carried between two people on poles. The path has become a procession, a steady stream of humanity flowing from the green heights of the orchards down to the brown flats where the drying beds await. You fall into step behind a woman whose basket is even larger than yours, marveling at how straight she holds herself, how her pace never falters despite the obvious weight. She's singing again, that same tune you heard earlier, and the sound mingles with the rustle of feet on dry earth and the distant hum of insects. The valley opens before you as you descend, revealing the drying grounds spread out along the banks of a seasonal stream that's dry now but will run with winter rains. This is where the transformation happens, where fresh figs become dried figs through nothing more complicated than sun and time and human attention. The stone beds cover perhaps 2 acres, flat slabs of local limestone, carefully leveled and positioned to catch maximum sunlight throughout the day. They are old, these beds. Some have been here so long that the stone has worn smooth under generations of fruit, developing a polish that almost shines in the direct sun. You approach the bed where you'll be working, a massive slab perhaps 20 feet square, its surface marked by shallow grooves that channel any unexpected rain away from the drying fruit. Other carriers are already arriving, tipping their baskets onto the stone and then using wooden rakes to spread the figs into a single layer. You lower your own basket carefully, bending your knees rather than your back, a lesson learned from watching someone who didn't, who spent the next 3 days working in obvious pain. And then you tip it, gently, watching the figs tumble onto the warm stone in a cascade of purple and green. The sound they make against the rock is different from the sound they made against each other. Sharper, more distinct, each fig announcing its arrival with a small thud that's almost musical. You squat beside the pile and begin spreading, your hands moving through the figs, separating them, arranging them so that no two touch. This spacing matters more than you might think. Figs that touch during drying can trap moisture between them, leading to mold or uneven results. Figs that touch can also stick together as they dry, creating clumps that will have to be separated later, damaging the skin and reducing their value. So you spread them carefully, almost reverently, giving each fig its own small territory on the warming stone. The sun beats down on your back as you work, and you can feel the heat radiating up from the rock, cooking you from both directions. The figs themselves seem to welcome it, their skins already beginning to change as the warmth draws moisture to the surface. You notice how some figs, the ones that were slightly overripe when picked, have already begun to weep syrup, tiny glistening drops that catch the light like amber. These will dry differently, their sugars concentrated from the start, and they'll be sought after by those who know the difference. A man you haven't met before works his way down the row of drying beds, stopping at each one to inspect the spread. He carries a long stick with a notched end, and every few steps he uses it to adjust a fig that's too close to its neighbor or to flick away a leaf that's blown onto the stone. When he reaches your bed he stops, surveys your work with an expression that reveals nothing, then nods once and moves on. You're not sure whether this counts as approval or simply the absence of disapproval, but you'll take it. The scale of the operation becomes apparent as you look around. Bed after bed stretches out before you, each one covered with its own layer of figs, each one attended by its own team of spreaders and turners. The total number of fruits must be in the millions, an almost inconceivable abundance, the harvest of thousands of trees condensed onto these flat stones. And this is just one drying ground. There are others, you know, scattered across the countryside around Carthage, each one processing the yield of its local orchards. The city will eat dried figs all winter, and trade them with half the Mediterranean, and still have enough left over to offer to the gods in thanks for another year of sun and rain. You finish spreading your basket's worth and straighten up slowly, feeling your back protest the change of position. The work isn't done. Far from it. You'll need to return to the orchards for another load, and another, and another, until the sun drops below the horizon and the day's harvest has all been transferred from tree to stone. But for now you have a moment, a brief pause, and you use it to look out across the drying grounds and try to absorb what you're seeing. The figs on the nearest bed still look like figs, plump, fresh, obviously just hours removed from the tree. But further away, where fruit has been drying for days, the transformation is already visible. Those figs have shrunk, their skins wrinkling, their colors deepening from bright purple to something closer to brown. They look less like fruit and more like something else entirely. Like jewels, maybe. Or like the desiccated offerings you've seen in temples, preserved not by human intention but by the simple passage of time in a dry climate. The scent that hangs over the drying grounds is unlike anything you've experienced before. It's sweet, obviously, intensely sweet, almost cloying, but it's also complex, layered, carrying notes of honey and hay and something else that you can't quite identify. This is the smell of water leaving fruit, of sugars concentrating, of summer being captured and held against the winter to come. You breathe it in and it fills your head, makes you slightly dizzy, and you understand why people speak of the fig harvest as something almost sacred, a ritual that connects the human to the natural in ways that ordinary agriculture doesn't quite achieve. A shout from the path pulls you back to the present. Another carrier is approaching, her basket full, and she needs you to clear space on the bed for her load. You step aside, watching as she tips her figs onto the stone, and then you're both spreading, working side by side in the rhythm that the harvest demands. Your hands move through the fruit, finding places for each fig, and you forget to think about the larger meaning of what you're doing. You're just working now, just spreading figs, just one small part of a vast machine that turns sunlight into food. But later, when you pause again, you'll remember that moment of looking out across the beds and feeling the weight of what's happening here. You'll remember the scent and the heat and the way the figs seem to glow in the afternoon light. And you'll understand that this is why people return to the harvest year after year, generation after generation, not because they have to, but because being part of this transformation, this slow miracle of sun and time, is its own reward. You arrange the figs in careful rows, not touching, as the morning dew evaporates and the real heat begins, and you quickly discover that the art of laying out fruit is more nuanced than you expected. The stone beneath your knees has warmed through the thin fabric of your tunic, and you can feel the heat rising, meeting the heat from above, creating a pocket of warmth that envelops you and the figs in equal measure. Each fig needs its own space, its own small territory on the limestone slab, and you've become something of a territorial negotiator, finding homes for thousands of small purple bodies across the vast expanse of white rock. The bed you're working on has been divided into sections, marked by shallow grooves carved into the stone, and each section corresponds to a particular day's harvest or a particular variety of figure. This organization matters later, when the drying is complete and merchants need to know which figs came from which trees, which will fetch higher prices, which are destined for local tables and which for ships bound for Greece or Egypt or Italy. You're working in a section reserved for the small, dark figs from the oldest trees, the ones that dry into concentrated nuggets of sweetness, almost like candy, that the wealthiest customers demand. Your hands move automatically now, having learned the spacing without conscious thought. A fig's width between each fruit, enough that air can circulate freely, enough that the sun can reach every surface. More space than that and you're wasting the precious drying surface, reducing the total harvest the bed can process. Less space and you risk the figs touching, sticking, trapping moisture between them. The optimal spacing has been worked out over centuries, passed down from generation to generation, and you follow it without question because the figs themselves will tell you if you get it wrong. A woman works beside you, her movements so fluid that she seems to barely touch the figs as she positions them. She's old enough to be your grandmother, her face a map of wrinkles that speak of decades in the sun. And she works without apparent effort, placing figs with a precision that you can only approximate through concentrated attention. Every few minutes she glances at your section, assessing your progress, and occasionally she reaches across to adjust a fig that you've placed slightly too close to its neighbor. She never speaks while doing this, never indicates whether your spacing errors are minor or catastrophic, and you've learned to accept these silent corrections as the teaching method of people who learned the same way, years before you were born. The sun continues its climb and the heat intensifies, pressing down on the drying grounds with increasing authority. You've drunk water twice already, and you'll need more soon, because the combination of physical labor and direct sun can sneak up on you, leaving you dizzy and confused before you recognize the danger. The older workers seem less affected, their bodies adapted through years of exposure, but you're still learning, still discovering your limits in this environment. By mid-morning your section of the bed is nearly full, a checkerboard of figs extending perhaps 15 feet in each direction. You stand to survey your work, stretching your back, and you're struck by the orderliness of it. The way the figs march across the stone in perfect rows, each one precisely positioned, each one beginning its slow transformation under the Mediterranean sun. It's satisfying in a way that's hard to describe. This imposition of human order on natural abundance, this collaboration between your labor and the sun's energy. But even as you admire your work, you notice that some of the figs have begun to change already. The ones that were slightly cracked when picked have started to weep syrup, small glistening droplets forming at the openings. Others have developed a slight wrinkling at their stems, the first sign that moisture is beginning to escape. And a few, you notice this with concern, have attracted the attention of ants, which have discovered the sweetness and are beginning to form columns across the stone. You reach down and flick away the ants you can reach, but more are coming, following the scent trails laid down by their scouts. This is a constant battle during drying, the struggle between human intention and insect appetite, and you're already learning that complete victory is impossible. The best you can hope for is to keep the damage manageable, to lose a few figs to the ants while saving the majority. You make a mental note to mention the ant column to the overseer, who may have strategies you haven't learned yet. The woman beside you has noticed the ants as well, and she's dealing with them in her own way, by crushing a few near the edge of the bed, creating a scent that seems to confuse the others, sending them into spiraling patterns instead of straight-line marches toward the figures. You watch her technique and try to replicate it, smearing ant bodies along the edge of your section, and you're surprised to see that it actually works. The column wavers, breaks apart, reforms heading in a different direction. You've bought some time. Historians still argue whether the Carthaginians used any form of pest control on their drying figs, or whether they simply accepted a certain level of loss as inevitable. The archaeological record provides few answers. Ant bodies don't preserve well, and the written sources from the period are more concerned with quantities traded than with the daily struggles of production. You suspect, based on what you're seeing around you, that the answer is both, that people used whatever methods worked, passing them down orally, while also accepting that some percentage of the harvest would feed creatures other than humans. The heat builds toward its midday peak and the work slows accordingly. Even the most experienced workers move more deliberately now, conserving energy, pacing themselves for the long afternoon ahead. You've finished your section and moved to a new one, starting the process again. Basket of fresh figs, tip them out, spread them carefully, maintain the spacing, check for ants. The repetition becomes meditative, your mind free to wander while your hands continue their precise work. You think about the journey these figs will take, the transformations still ahead of them. In a few days they'll be turned for the first time, exposing their other sides to the sun. In a week they'll be stacked and pressed, their remaining moisture evening out through the pile. In 2 weeks they'll be packed into amphorae, sealed with pine resin and olive oil, loaded onto ships bound for ports you'll never see. And months from now, someone in Egypt or Greece or Italy will bite into one of these figs, taste the summer sun of Carthage, and have no idea that you were the one who placed it on this stone, who flicked away the ants, who ensured it had enough space to dry. That thought, the anonymity of it, the way your labor will be consumed without recognition, should perhaps bother you. Instead it feels right. Feels like the proper relationship between human work and the natural world. The figs don't care who picked them or spread them. They only care about the sun, about the dry air, about the slow process of becoming something other than what they were. You're just a helper in that process, a pair of hands that happens to be available. And next year there will be other hands, and the year after still others. And the figs will continue to dry on these same stones long after your hands have turned to dust. A shout from across the drying grounds breaks your reverie. Someone has spotted a cloud in the distance, the first cloud you've seen in days. And there's tension in the shout that tells you clouds during drying season are not welcome visitors. You look up, shading your eyes. And sure enough there's a small white puff on the horizon, barely visible. Nothing that would worry you in any other context. But here, among the drying figs, even a small cloud could mean rain. And rain during the drying process is catastrophe. The overseer appears, moving quickly along the rows of beds, assessing the situation. He stops near you, squinting at the distant cloud, and after a long moment he shakes his head. "Too far," he says, in the Punic that you're slowly beginning to understand. "No rain today." The tension eases slightly, though you notice that everyone keeps glancing at the sky as they work. The cloud a reminder of how fragile this process really is, how dependent on conditions that can change without warning. You return to your spreading, but now you're more aware of the sky, more conscious of the vulnerability of everything spread out on these stones. Thousands of hours of labor, millions of figs, all of it subject to the whims of weather. One afternoon of rain and the harvest would rot, would turn into a stinking mess that would have to be scraped off the stones and fed to animals or simply discarded. The thought makes you work faster, though you know that speed won't help if the rain actually comes. Nothing will help, except the luck of weather. The chance that the clouds will stay away for another 2 weeks until the drying is complete. The woman beside you notices your increased pace and says something you don't quite catch. Her tone suggests she's telling you to slow down, that rushing won't help, that the figs have their own timeline and your anxiety won't speed it. You try to take her advice, forcing yourself back to the deliberate rhythm that the work requires, but your eyes keep drifting to the horizon, checking on that small white cloud that hasn't moved or grown, that sits there like a threat you can't quite ignore. You return at midday to flip each fig with wooden tongs, ensuring the sun finds every hidden pocket of moisture, and the heat has become something you inhabit rather than merely experience. The stone drying beds radiate stored warmth from the morning, and the sun directly overhead adds its own contribution, creating a pocket of atmosphere where the temperature seems to have no relation to anything you've previously understood about heat. You move through this environment slowly, deliberately, because speed would cost you more in energy than it would save in time, and because the figs themselves demand a certain reverence in their handling. The wooden tongs in your hand are simple things, 2 curved pieces of olive wood, joined at one end with a leather thong, their tips spread wide enough to grip a fig without crushing it. Someone made these tongs, probably during the slower months when there was time for such craftsmanship, and they've been used for so many seasons that the wood has darkened and smoothed, taking on a patina that speaks of countless figs handled, countless flips completed. You hold them and you feel connected to all those previous users, all those hands that gripped this same tool in this same heat, performing this same essential task. Flipping fig sounds simple, and in principle it is simple. You grasp each fig gently with the tongs, lift it, turn it over, and place it back on the stone exactly where it was. The side that faced up all morning now faces down, contacting the warm stone, while the side that rested on stone now faces up, receiving the direct rays of the sun. This even exposure ensures that drying happens uniformly, that no pocket of moisture remains hidden against the stone, that the finished product will be consistent from one side to the other. But simplicity in description doesn't mean simplicity in execution. The figs have changed since you laid them out this morning. They are slightly smaller now, slightly shrunken, and their skins have begun to wrinkle in ways that make them more delicate, more prone to tearing if handled roughly. The tongs must grip firmly enough to lift the fig but gently enough not to damage the softening skin. Too much pressure and you'll leave marks, create weak points where spoilage can enter. Too little pressure and the fig will slip, fall, perhaps split against the stone. The optimal grip is something you learn through failure, through the small disasters of dropped and damaged fruit that teach your hands what words cannot. You work your way across your section of the bed, squatting or kneeling as needed, your body finding positions that minimize the strain of constant movement. The figs pass before you in their thousands, each one requiring a moment of attention, each one a small decision about grip and pressure and placement. The work is monotonous in a way that could drive you mad if you let it, but you've learned to enter a kind of trance, to let your hands work while your mind wanders where it will. This is the secret of agricultural labor, you're discovering. Not to fight the repetition but to embrace it, to let it carry you along like a current, to find the meditation hidden within the monotony. Around you, other workers perform the same task on their own sections, the whole drying grounds transformed into a vast theater of flipping. The scene from above would look like a slow wave passing across the beds, each worker moving methodically through their assigned area, the figs gradually turning from one side to the other. There's no coordination to this movement, no signal that tells everyone to start at once. Each worker simply begins when they are ready, works at their own pace, finishes when their section is complete. And yet the overall effect is coordinated, synchronized, because everyone understands that midday is the time for flipping, that the sun at its zenith offers the best conditions for this work. The figs that have been drying longest, those laid out 3 or 4 days ago, look different from the fresh ones you're handling today. They've shrunk significantly, their skins wrinkled into patterns as individual as fingerprints, their colors deepened from bright purple to something closer to brown or black. These older figs require even gentler handling, their flesh so concentrated that they are almost leathery, almost resistant to the tongs' grip. When you flip them, they feel different in the tongs, denser, heavier for their size, more like small stones than like fruit. But they are not stones, and too much pressure would still damage them, would crack that concentrated flesh and release the sweetness prematurely. A fig slips from your tongs and falls to the stone, splitting slightly on impact. You pick it up carefully, inspect the damage, and decide it's still salvageable. The split is small, and the drying process will probably seal it before spoilage can enter. But you're not certain, and the uncertainty bothers you. This fig might have been perfect, might have fetched the highest price, might have traveled across the sea to some important table. Now it's compromised, reduced in value by your momentary lapse. You place it carefully back on the stone, positioning it so the split faces up, hoping the sun will do its work and somehow heal the damage. You know it won't, not really, but you do it anyway because hope is part of this work too. The woman beside you, the same one who's been silently correcting your spacing all morning, glances at your dropped fig and says something. This time you catch enough of the words to understand. She's telling you not to worry, that everyone drops figs, that the important thing is to learn from each drop and drop fewer tomorrow. It's the longest communication she's offered, and you nod your thanks, feeling oddly touched by this small kindness from someone who's spent the whole morning treating you as barely competent. The sun has passed its zenith and begun its slow descent toward the sea by the time you finish your section. Your back aches from the constant bending and straightening, your hands cramp from the repetitive grip of the tongs, and your head throbs slightly from hours of concentrated attention in the heat. But you're done, at least for now, and you can rest briefly before the next task begins. You find a patch of shade beside one of the stone walls that border the drying grounds, lower yourself onto the warm ground, and close your eyes. The sounds of the drying grounds continue around you, the soft movements of other workers, the occasional call between sections, the constant hum of insects that seem unaffected by the heat. You're aware of these sounds without really hearing them, your mind too tired to process much beyond the simple fact of your own exhaustion. You think about the figs you've just flipped, all those thousands of small fruits, each one now positioned to receive the afternoon sun on its previously shaded side. You think about the sun itself, that great engine driving this whole process, how it asks nothing in return for its energy except your willingness to work within its rhythms. A shadow falls across you and you open your eyes to find the overseer standing over you, a clay cup in his hand. He offers it without speaking, and you take it gratefully, drinking the water in long swallows that empty the cup completely. He takes it back, still without speaking, and moves on to check on other workers. You realize, belatedly, that this is his way of acknowledging your work, not with praise, which would be inappropriate, but with water, which is necessary. In the economy of the drying grounds, water is praise enough. You force yourself to stand, because the afternoon is still young and there are more figs to flip, more sections to complete before the day ends. Your body protests, but you ignore it, walking back toward your assigned area with the slow, deliberate pace that the heat demands. The figs await, thousands of them, each one requiring your attention, each one part of the vast transformation that turns summer into sustenance. You pick up your tongs and you begin again, working your way across the stone, one fig at a time, one flip at a time, losing yourself in the rhythm that will carry you through to evening. You sit through the afternoon with a palm frond fan, chasing away insects while the figs slowly shrink and sweeten, and you've entered a state of existence that barely qualifies as wakefulness. The heat presses down on the drying grounds with the weight of something solid, something you could almost reach up and touch, and movement of any kind requires an act of will that feels disproportionate to the task. But the insects don't care about your exhaustion, don't care that you'd rather be doing anything other than sitting here waving a fan. And so you sit and you wave and you watch the figs continue their slow transformation under the unrelenting sun. The fan is simple, just a palm frond stripped of most of its leaflets, leaving a handful at the end to create a broad, flat surface that moves air when waved. You hold it like a child's toy, which in a sense it is, though the game you're playing has real stakes. Without constant attention, the wasps would descend in force, landing on the figs, piercing the softening skins to reach the concentrated sweetness within. A few wasps you can tolerate, can wave away, can accept as part of the natural order. But a swarm would mean disaster, would mean figs ruined by the dozens, their interiors exposed to rot and further infestation. The wasps themselves are beautiful in a terrible way, golden and black, their bodies gleaming in the sun, their wings a blur of motion when they hover near the fruit. They are not aggressive toward humans during these afternoon hours, too focused on the feast to bother with you, but their presence still raises your heart rate slightly every time one approaches. You wave the fan and it veers away, seeking an unprotected fig elsewhere, and you feel a small satisfaction in this victory even as you know there are thousands more wasps waiting for you to relax your vigilance. You've developed techniques over the long afternoons. The fan works best with a steady rhythm, not too fast, Not too slow. Fast enough to create a constant movement that discourages landing. Slow enough that you can maintain it for hours without exhausting your arm. You've found a cadence that works, a gentle back and forth that covers the section of the bed you're responsible for. And you've settled into it the way you might settle into a rocking chair, letting the motion become automatic while your mind wanders elsewhere. The figs themselves have become almost familiar to you. Individual fruits that you recognize by their shapes and colors and patterns of wrinkling. There's one near the edge of your section that splits slightly during flipping, and you've been watching it all afternoon, noting how the split seems to be closing as the fruit dries, the edges drawing together as moisture leaves the flesh. It might survive after all. Might dry into something saleable despite its earlier damage. You find yourself rooting for this fig, wanting it to succeed, which is absurd because figs don't succeed or fail. They just dry or they don't, but you root for it anyway. A shadow passes over you and you look up to see clouds. Real clouds this time. Not the distant threat of the morning, but actual clouds gathering in the western sky. Your heart drops. Rain during drying is catastrophe. And these clouds have the look of rain clouds, heavy and dark, building on the horizon in ways that suggest they mean business. Around you, other workers have noticed too, and a murmur runs through the drying grounds as everyone assesses the threat. The overseer appears, moving quickly, his face set in an expression you can't read. He stops at the center of the grounds and turns slowly, scanning the sky, and you watch him make the calculation that will determine the fate of thousands of hours of labor. After a long moment, he shakes his head and gestures for everyone to continue. The clouds are still too far, he judges. The rain, if it comes at all, will hold off until evening. You want to believe him, but you also want to start gathering figs, to protect what you've worked so hard to create. You do neither. You sit and you wave your fan and you watch the clouds build, waiting for a decision that may never come. The wasps, you notice, have become more active. Perhaps they sense the change in pressure, the approaching weather. Perhaps they are simply responding to the increased attention from humans, the tension in the air. Whatever the reason, they are swarming more aggressively now, testing your defenses, looking for the gaps in your vigilance. You wave your fan faster, driving them back, and for a moment the work of fig protection becomes almost frantic. A battle against insects that care nothing for your exhaustion or your fears about the weather. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, the wasps retreat. You don't know why. Some signal you can't perceive, some shifting conditions that sends them back to their nests. The air around your section clears and you're left alone with the figs, the fan, and the clouds still building in the west. You slow your rhythm, return to the steady cadence that you can maintain indefinitely, and you try not to think about what happens if the overseer's judgment proves wrong. Historians still argue whether the Carthaginians had any method of protecting drying figs from sudden rain, or whether they simply accepted the risk as part of the agricultural cycle. Some point to references in later Roman texts to covered drying sheds, suggesting that the technology existed. Others note that the scale of Carthaginian fig production would have made covered drying impractical. Too many figs, too much surface area, too much investment in structures that would sit idle most of the year. You look at the open beds around you, at the thousands of figs spread across the stone, and you suspect the answer is that they took their chances, that they trusted the Mediterranean climate to hold off the rain until the drying was complete. The afternoon wears on and the clouds do not release their rain. They build and darken and threaten, but they hold whatever moisture they carry, keeping it suspended above you while you continue your vigil. The tension in the drying grounds eases slightly as it becomes clear that the overseer's judgment was correct. The rain will wait, at least for today. But everyone knows that tomorrow might be different, that the clouds could return, that this game of weather chicken could end badly at any moment. You've been sitting for hours now, your back against a low stone wall, your arm moving automatically with the fan. The figs in your section have changed visibly since morning, their skins more wrinkled, their colors deeper, their shapes more irregular. Some have developed a powdery bloom on their surfaces, a natural coating that forms as sugars migrate to the outside and then crystallize in the dry air. This bloom is a sign of quality, an indication that the figs are drying properly, that their sugars are concentrating in ways that will make them intensely sweet. A child approaches with water, making her rounds, and you drink deeply from the cup she offers. She's young, perhaps 7 or 8, but she moves with the confidence of someone who knows her place in the harvest hierarchy. Water carrier is an important job, especially on afternoons like this, and she performs it with a seriousness that would be amusing in other contexts but here feels entirely appropriate. You thank her in your halting punic and she nods, already moving toward the next worker, her responsibility clear. The sun has begun its final descent toward the sea, the light shifting from white to gold to the deep orange that precedes sunset. Your shift on the drying grounds is almost over. Soon you'll be relieved by the evening workers, who will continue the vigil through the cooler hours, watching for different threats as darkness falls. You're tired in ways that go beyond physical exhaustion. Your mind is drained as your body, your sense of time dissolved into the endless rhythm of fan and fig and wasp. But you're also satisfied, in a way that's hard to articulate. You've protected these figures. You've kept them safe through one more afternoon of sun and threat and insect attention. When they are finally dried and packed and shipped across the sea, some small part of their existence will be attributable to your labor, your vigilance, your willingness to sit in the heat and wave a palm frond for hours on end. It's not glory, not recognition, not anything that will ever be recorded or remembered. But it's something, and as you stand and stretch and prepare to hand over your section to the next worker, you feel that something settle into your bones like the warmth from the stone. You carry the day's dried figs back to the courtyard, where women sort them by quality under flickering oil lamps, and the weight on your shoulders tells you everything about how the day went. The baskets are lighter than they were this morning. The figs have lost water, have shrunk and concentrated, have begun their transformation from fresh fruit to preserved food. But they are still heavy enough to make your arms ache, still substantial enough to remind you that this harvest is real, is happening, is demanding everything you have to give. The path from drying grounds to city follows a different route than the morning's journey, winding through the lower slopes where vegetable gardens give way to small holdings and then to the first scattered houses of the urban fringe. You walk in company with other carriers, a small procession of tired people moving through the twilight, and the conversation that flows around you is different now, quieter, more reflective, punctuated by yawns and the small sounds of bodies protesting the day's labor. Someone starts a song and others join in, a slow melody that seems to rise from the earth itself, and you walk to its rhythm without needing to understand the words. The city gates loom ahead, massive stone structures that have stood for centuries, their surfaces worn by countless passages like this one. The guards know you by now, know the rhythm of the harvest, and they wave you through with barely a glance, more interested in their own conversation than in the baskets of dried fruit passing under their watch. You step from the open countryside into the narrow streets of Carthage, and the change is immediate. The buildings press close on either side, blocking the last of the evening light, forcing you to navigate by memory and the occasional flicker of lamps through open doorways. The courtyard you're heading for lies deep in the residential quarter, hidden from the street by a high wall that keeps out both noise and curious eyes. You find the entrance by feel, your hand running along the rough stone until it encounters the wooden door, and you push through into a space that seems almost magical after the dim streets. The courtyard opens to the sky, catching the last of the twilight, and around its edges oil lamps have been lit, their flames creating pools of light that illuminate the work underway. Women sit on low stools around these pools of light, their hands moving among piles of figs with a speed that seems impossible given the conditions. Each woman has a basket of unsorted figs beside her and several smaller containers in front of her, divided by quality. The best figs, the largest, the most perfectly dried, the ones with the finest bloom on their skins, go into one container. The slightly imperfect figs, those with minor blemishes or irregular shapes, go into another. The damaged figs, the ones that split during drying or were attacked by insects, go into a third, destined for immediate consumption or for pressing into lower-grade products. You set your basket down beside one of the sorters and she nods without looking up, her hands never pausing in their work. You watch for a moment, mesmerized by the economy of her movements, how she reaches into the basket, withdraws a fig, glances at it for a fraction of a second, and places it in the appropriate container, all in a single fluid motion. She's been doing this for decades, you realize. She could sort figs in her sleep, probably has sorted figs in her sleep. On those nights when the harvest demands every available hand and exhaustion becomes just another condition to work within. Other carriers are arriving, adding their baskets to the growing pile, and the courtyard gradually fills with the soft sounds of sorting. The rustle of figs moving between containers, the occasional murmured comment between workers, the constant low hum of the city beyond the walls. The oil lamps flicker and smoke, casting shadows that dance across the stone paving, and the scent of dried figs mingles with the scent of burning oil and the distant salt of the sea. You find a place against the wall and lower yourself to the ground, too tired to stand but not yet ready to leave. The sorting will continue for hours, long after you've found your bed, and part of you wants to stay and watch, to understand this final stage of the day's work. But another part of you, the part that's been carrying baskets and flipping figs and chasing wasps since before dawn, wants only to close your eyes and let the sounds of the courtyard wash over you like water. A woman near you, younger than most of the sorters, perhaps your age, glances up and catches you watching. She smiles, then returns to her work, but the smile was enough, was acknowledgement that you exist, that your labor in carrying these figs matters to the work she's doing. You feel strangely grateful for this small recognition, this moment of connection across the different tasks that together make the harvest possible. The sorting follows rules that you're only beginning to understand. Size matters, obviously. Larger figs command higher prices, are sought after by those who can afford the best. But color matters too, and texture, and the pattern of wrinkling that develops during drying. Figs that have developed a heavy bloom, that powdery coating of crystallized sugars, are prized above those that haven't, even if the latter are larger. Figs that have maintained their shape, that haven't flattened or deformed during drying, are preferred for certain uses. And figs that show any sign of spoilage, any hint of the mold or rot that can develop despite everyone's best efforts, are rejected entirely, destined for the compost heap or the animals. The sorters debate these distinctions constantly. Their conversations are running commentary on the quality of each basket, each batch, each individual figure. You listen without understanding everything, picking out words here and there, building your vocabulary through context and repetition. Good and bad you know. Large and small you know. For the temple you catch, and for the ships, and for the family table. The figs are being assigned destinies based on qualities you can barely perceive, sorted into categories that will determine where they end up and who will eventually eat them. A commotion at the courtyard entrance draws everyone's attention. A man has arrived with news. Something about the harbor, about ships, about traders asking about the fig harvest. The sorters pause in their work, listening, and you catch enough to understand that the first foreign merchants of the season have arrived, that they are already making inquiries, that the price of this year's figs will soon be established through negotiation and competition. The news ripples through the courtyard, sparking conversations about markets and values and the relative wealth of different trading partners. The woman beside you, the one who smiled, mutters something under her breath that you don't catch, but her tone suggests skepticism about the trader's intentions. You've heard that Carthaginian merchants are the best in the world, that they drive hard bargains and keep their own counsel. But you've also heard that foreign traders sometimes try to take advantage, to claim that figs are lower quality than they really are, to depress prices through deception. The sorter's work becomes evidence in these negotiations, proof of the care that's gone into every stage of the harvest. You watch as one of the older women holds up a particularly fine fig, turning it in the lamplight so that its bloom catches the flame and glows briefly like something precious. This fig, you realize, will be shown to traders as an example of what's available, the best of the best, the standard against which all others will be measured. It will travel perhaps, accompanying a merchant on his rounds, serving as ambassador for the entire harvest. And somewhere far from here, someone will see it and want it, will offer silver or gold or goods in exchange, will begin the process that turns dried fruit into traded wealth. The night deepens around the courtyard and the sorters work on, their hands never stopping, their eyes never losing their focus despite the lateness of the hour. You've shifted position several times, trying to find comfort on the hard stone, and you know you should leave, should find your bed, should rest for another day of work tomorrow. But something keeps you here, some fascination with this process that turns the chaos of harvest into the order of commerce, that transforms thousands of individual figs into categories and qualities and prices. Finally, you force yourself to stand, your body protesting the movement after so long at rest. You nod toward the woman who smiled, and she nods back, and then you're moving toward the door, stepping carefully around the piles of sorted figs, breathing in the scent that will probably never leave you now, that has worked its way into your clothes and your hair and your dreams. The street outside is dark and quiet, the city settled into the rhythm of night, and you walk home alone through the narrow passages, your feet finding the way without conscious guidance, your mind still full of figs and flames and the soft sounds of sorting. You learn the technique of pressing figs into dense cakes that will last through the rainy months and beyond. And this knowledge comes to you through your hands rather than your head, through the feel of dried fruit yielding under pressure rather than any formal instruction. The courtyard where last night's sorting took place has transformed for this new stage of work. The low stools and sorting baskets replaced by heavy stone slabs and wooden presses that look like they've been here for centuries, which they probably have. The figs you'll be pressing today come from the second quality pile, not the perfect specimens destined for export as whole fruits, but the slightly blemished, slightly irregular figs that are perfectly good for eating but not quite beautiful enough for the most demanding customers. These figs will be transformed into something else entirely. Dense blocks of concentrated fruit that can be sliced or broken apart as needed, that will keep for years rather than months, that represent the most efficient possible storage of summer's abundance. You stand before one of the stone slabs, watching as an older woman demonstrates the technique. She takes a handful of dried figs and places them on the stone, then begins to work them with the heel of her hand, pressing and folding, gradually incorporating more figs into the mass. The dried fruit yields to her pressure, the individual figs losing their identity as they merge into a single cohesive lump. She works patiently, methodically, adding figs a few at a time, until she has a mass perhaps the size of a small loaf of bread. Then comes the pressing. She transfers the mass to a wooden mold, a shallow rectangular box with removable sides, and places another block of wood on top. Into this assembly she fits the lever of the press, a long beam that pivots against a stone upright, and she begins to apply pressure, leaning her weight against the beam, gradually compressing the figs into a dense, uniform block. The press groans with the strain, the wood protesting, but the figs yield further, their remaining moisture acting as a binding agent that fuses them together. When she releases the pressure and removes the mold, you see the result. A fig cake perhaps an inch thick, 6 inches wide, a foot long, its surface smooth and uniform, its edges sharp where the mold contained it. She picks it up and hands it to you, and you're surprised by the weight. Dense, solid, nothing like the loose figs you've been handling. You bring it to your nose and the scent is intense, concentrated, the essence of fig multiplied 100 times. This is what survives. You realize. This is what carries the harvest through the winter. What feeds families when the trees are bare. What sustains travelers on long voyages when fresh food is unavailable. This fig cake, unremarkable in appearance, contains within it the labor of dozens of people, the sun of countless days, the sweetness of an entire season. You hold it like something precious, because it is. Your turn comes and you approach the stone slab with something like nervousness. The figs are piled beside you, their wrinkled skins catching the morning light, and you reach for a handful the way you saw the woman do. They feel different under your hands than fresh figs did. Tougher, more resistant, but also more yielding in a different way. Their internal structure changed by the loss of moisture. You press down with the heel of your hand and feel them give. Feel the individual figs begin to merge, their skin splitting to release the concentrated flesh within. You add more figs and press again, and again, building the mass gradually as you were shown. The work requires a certain rhythm, a certain patience. If you press too hard too soon, the figs will simply crush rather than merge, leaving you with fragments rather than a cohesive mass. If you press too gently, you'll be here all day, making no progress. The right pressure is somewhere in between, firm enough to fuse but gentle enough to allow the figs to find their own way toward union. The woman watches your progress, offering occasional corrections with gestures rather than words. When you've built a mass about the right size, she indicates that it's time for the mold. You transfer it carefully, trying not to disturb its coherence, and you fit the top block into place. Then you move to the press, fitting the lever into its notch, and you begin to apply pressure. This is the moment of truth. Too little pressure and the cake will be loose, will fall apart when handled. Too much pressure and you'll squeeze out too much of the remaining moisture, leaving the cake dry and brittle. The right pressure is something you have to feel, have to sense through the feedback of the lever and the groaning of the press. You lean gradually, increasing the force, and you feel the figs yielding beneath you, compressing, consolidating. When you think it's enough, when the lever won't move further without unreasonable effort, you hold it there, counting slowly in your head the way you were taught. When you release the pressure and remove the mold, your first fig cake sits before you. It's not as perfect as the woman's. The edges are slightly irregular, the surface not quite smooth, but it's a cake, a real fig cake, and you feel a surge of satisfaction that surprises you with its intensity. You've made something that will last, something that will feed people months from now, something that connects your labor to the future in a way that fresh figs never could. The woman picks up your cake, examines it critically, then nods and sets it with the others. Approval, you realize, or at least the absence of disapproval. You've passed whatever test this represents, have demonstrated that you can be trusted with this stage of the work. You reach for another handful of figs and begin again, building on what you've learned, each cake slightly better than the last as your hands find the rhythm. Around you, others are engaged in the same work, the courtyard filled with the sounds of pressing, the soft thud of figs being worked on stone, the groan of wooden presses under strain, the occasional comment between workers about technique or quality or the weather that still threatens in the distance. The scale of production becomes apparent as you look around. Stacks of fig cakes growing beside each workstation, piles of sorted figs diminishing as the pressing continues, the whole courtyard organized around this single purpose. Historians still argue whether the Carthaginians invented fig pressing or learned it from earlier Mediterranean cultures. The Egyptians had methods for preserving fruit, certainly, and the Minoans before them. But the Carthaginian approach, the dense cakes, the wooden presses, the systematic organization of production, seems to have been unique, a response to the particular conditions of their city and their trade networks. Whatever its origins, the technique you're learning has been refined over centuries, passed down through generations, each worker adding small improvements that gradually accumulated into the system you're now part of. The cakes you learn have multiple uses. Some will be stored for local consumption, stacked in cool warehouses and broken open as needed throughout the winter. Others will be packed into amphorae for export, their density making them ideal for long voyages where space is limited. Still others will be offered in temples, their perfect uniformity symbolizing the order that humans impose on nature's abundance. And some, you're told, will be reserved for special purposes, for medicinal preparations, for sweetening other foods, for the tables of the wealthy who appreciate the concentration of flavor that only pressing can achieve. As the morning progresses, you develop a rhythm. Handful of figs, work them on the stone, add more, work again, transfer to mold, apply pressure, release, stack the finished cake. Repeat. The repetition becomes meditative, your mind free to wander while your hands continue their work. You think about the journey these cakes will take, about the people who will eat them months from now in places you'll never see, about the way your labor reaches forward in time to touch lives you'll never know. A child appears with water, making her rounds, and you drink gratefully, your throat dry from the dust that rises from the pressed figures. She looks at your stack of cakes with the critical eye of someone who's been raised around this work, and you see her slight nod of approval before she moves on. Even the children here know quality when they see it, have internalized the standards that govern this work. By midday you've produced perhaps 20 cakes, a small contribution to the growing stacks around the courtyard. Your hands are stained dark with fig residue, your arms ache from the repeated pressure, and you're ready for the break that's coming. But when the signal comes to pause for the midday meal, you find yourself reluctant to stop, caught up in the rhythm of production, wanting to see how many more cakes you can complete before the day ends. You eat quickly, sitting in the shade with other workers, and the conversation turns to the pressing itself. Comparisons of technique, debates about the optimal pressure, stories of past harvests when conditions were different. You listen more than you speak, still learning the vocabulary of this work, but you feel yourself being drawn into the community of pressers, accepted as someone who can contribute to the conversation even if only through attention. The afternoon stretches before you, long and warm, and you return to your stone slab with something like eagerness. The figs await, and the press, and the satisfaction of watching formless fruit become shaped cakes, of contributing to a process that will outlast you, of learning with your hands what your mind could never quite grasp through words alone. You sample figs from different drying stages, discovering how time transforms their flavor from honey to caramel to wine. And this education happens informally, between tasks, when someone hands you a fig and says taste this in a tone that makes clear refusal is not an option. The woman who's been teaching you pressing, her name, you've finally learned, is Aries Hat, presses a small dried fig into your palm during a break, watching your face as you bite into it. This fig is from the earliest stage of drying, perhaps 3 days on the stone. It yields easily to your teeth, still retaining enough moisture that its texture is closer to fresh fruit than to the leathery figs you've been pressing. The flavor floods your mouth. Intense, yes, but still recognizable as the fig you picked days ago. Its essential character unchanged despite the water loss. It tastes like honey, like the flowers the bees visited to make that honey, like the sun that warmed both the flowers and the fruit. You chew slowly, deliberately, trying to understand what Ari's hat wants you to learn from this sample. She hands you another, this one darker, more wrinkled, clearly further along in the drying process. This fig resists your bite, its texture chewy, almost meaty, and the flavor has shifted dramatically. The honey notes have deepened into something closer to caramel, with undertones of molasses and something else you can't quite identify. Spice, perhaps, or the memory of smoke from distant fires. This fig has spent more time on the stone, has lost more water, has concentrated its sugars until they approach the intensity of candy. The third fig Ari's hat offers is darker still, almost black, its surface covered with the bloom of crystallized sugars that marks the highest quality. When you bite into it, the experience is entirely different. The texture is dense, almost solid, and the flavor hits you in waves. First the caramel you tasted in the second fig, then something deeper, darker, like wine or aged spirits, then a finish that lingers for minutes after you've swallowed, leaving your mouth feeling warm and satisfied. This fig has been drying for perhaps 2 weeks, has reached the stage where it's ready for pressing or packing, has achieved the concentration that makes dried figs a delicacy rather than mere preservation. Ari's hat watches you through all 3 tastings, her expression unreadable. When you've finished the last one, she asks a question in Punic that you barely understand, something about which you prefer. You point to the second fig, the caramel one, and she nods slowly, then reaches into her basket and gives you 2 more just like it. This, you realize, is her way of saying you've chosen correctly, that your taste aligns with the preferences of those who know figs best. Throughout the drying grounds, similar tastings happen constantly. Workers sample figs at different stages, building mental catalogs of how flavor evolves with time. Merchants who visit to inspect the harvest are offered samples, their reactions noted, their preferences recorded for future reference. Even the children who run water and chase birds are given figs to taste, learning from the youngest ages what good figs should be. The whole community is engaged in this sensory education, passing down knowledge that can't be written, can only be experienced. You find yourself sampling figs at every opportunity now, unable to resist the temptation of comparing one stage against another. The figs from the oldest trees, you discover, develop different flavors than those from younger trees. More complex, more varied, with notes that shift from one fruit to the next even when they've dried for the same length of time. The figs from different exposures also taste different, those from the hottest southern slopes developing caramel notes faster, those from gentler slopes retaining more of their honey character even after extended drying. During one afternoon break, you wander to a part of the drying grounds where figs have been left longer than usual. Experimental batches that the overseer is testing for some purpose he hasn't explained. These figs are so dark they are almost unrecognizable as fruit. Their surface is so wrinkled that they resemble small stones more than anything edible. You pick one up, expecting it to be hard, and you're surprised by how much it gives to pressure. The interior, you realize, remains soft despite the leathery exterior. You bite into it carefully, not sure what to expect, and the flavor that releases is unlike anything you've experienced. It's sweet, intensely sweet, but the sweetness has transformed into something almost alcoholic, like the best vintage wine reduced to its essence. There are tannins here too, a slight astringency that cleanses your palate between waves of fruit. This fig has been drying so long that fermentation has begun. Not the spoiling kind that ruins food, but the controlled kind that creates new flavors, new possibilities. You bring one back to Ari's hat, offering it the way she's offered you so many samples. She takes it, examines it, bites into it with the same careful attention she brings to everything. For a long moment she chews silently, her eyes slightly unfocused as she processes the flavor. Then she nods, once, and tucks the remaining half into a pouch for later. You've given her something worth keeping. You realize. You've contributed to her knowledge the way she's contributed to yours. The sampling continues over the following days, becoming part of your routine. Before you press figs into cakes, you taste a few from each batch, checking that they've reached the right stage. When you carry baskets from drying grounds to courtyard, you sample along the way, monitoring how transport affects the fruit. Even during the long afternoons of wasp chasing, you reach for a fig now and then, comparing today's flavor to yesterday's, building the mental map that will guide your work for the rest of the season. You notice patterns that surprise you. Figs dried on stone develop different flavors than figs dried on woven mats, even when the mats are placed on the same stone. Figs dried in the company of other figs taste different than figs dried in isolation, as if they exchange something through the air. Figs that were picked early in the morning taste different than figs picked at midday, even when dried for the same length of time. The variables multiply endlessly, and your palate struggles to keep up, to categorize and remember all the variations. Historians still argue whether the ancient Carthaginians understood the science behind these flavor differences, or whether they simply observed and responded to them empirically. Some point to references in later texts suggesting sophisticated knowledge of how drying conditions affect flavor. Others note that empirical observation, passed down through generations, can produce results that look like science without actually being science. From where you sit, surrounded by workers who've spent their lives with figs, the distinction seems unimportant. They know what they know, and they know it well enough to produce figs that the whole Mediterranean wants to buy. A merchant visits the drying grounds one afternoon, a Greek from somewhere in Sicily based on his accent, and you watch as he's guided through the sampling process. The overseer offers him figs at various stages, watching his reactions the way Aries had watched yours. The merchant talks constantly, praising some figs, criticizing others, negotiating prices even as he tastes. By the time he leaves, he's committed to purchasing several shiploads, and you realize that these tastings aren't just education, they're commerce. They're the foundation of the trade that makes Carthage wealthy. You sample a fig that's been drying for exactly the right length of time. Not too long, not too short. The caramel notes perfectly balanced with the honey, the texture chewy but not tough, the bloom just beginning to form on the surface. This fig, you realize, is what everyone is working toward. The ideal that all the labor and attention is meant to achieve. You hold it in your hand, this small perfect thing, and you understand why people devote their lives to this work. The moment when everything comes together, when conditions align and knowledge combines with luck to produce something that couldn't exist otherwise, that moment is worth all the difficult days, all the exhausted nights, all the years of learning. You eat the fig slowly, making it last, and the flavor stays with you through the rest of the afternoon. A reminder of why you're here, why anyone is here, why this ancient work continues generation after generation. The figs are teaching you, still teaching you, and you're finally learning to listen. You help pack the dried figs into tall clay jars sealed with pine resin and olive oil for voyages across the sea. And this work happens in a different part of the city, near the harbor, where the sounds of ships and sailors provide constant background music to the labor. The amphorae stand in rows like silent soldiers, their pointed bases tucked into holes in the ground or nestled against each other for support, their wide mouths gaping open to receive the harvest you've spent weeks preparing. The jars themselves are remarkable objects, each one thrown on a potter's wheel by hands that have made thousands of similar vessels. They stand about 3 feet tall, their bodies tapering to points that serve multiple purposes, easy to tip for pouring, easy to nest in ship holds, easy to drive into sand or soft ground for temporary storage. The clay is local, taken from beds near the city, mixed with temper to prevent cracking during firing. Some jars bear the stamps of their makers, small marks pressed into the wet clay before firing, signatures that will travel across the sea with the figs inside. You approach the packing area with a basket of fig cakes, the dense blocks you learn to press in the courtyard. These are the figs destined for the longest voyages, the ones that will travel to Egypt and Greece and maybe beyond, their concentrated form making them ideal for transport where space is at a premium. The cakes stack neatly, their uniform shape allowing efficient packing, and you handle them carefully despite their durability. Even these dense blocks can be damaged by rough treatment. The packers work in teams, each group responsible for a different type of fig product. Some handle the whole dried figs, the perfect specimens that will be sold to wealthy customers who appreciate presentation as much as flavor. Others handle the second-quality figs, packed in bulk for more ordinary markets. And your team handles the fig cakes, arranging them in the amphory with the same attention to spacing you learned on the drying stones. The technique for packing fig cakes requires practice. You can't just throw them in and hope for the best. They need to be arranged in layers, each cake positioned to minimize empty space. The layers staggered like bricks in a wall to provide stability during transport. You start with a layer of cakes at the bottom of the jar, placed close together but not quite touching, allowing for the slight expansion that happens as they settle. Then you add a layer of some packing material, dried leaves, sometimes, or woven grass mats, before starting the next layer of cakes. A woman named Bamilkau supervises your team, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She's been packing figs for longer than you've been alive, and she moves among the workers with the confidence of someone who's seen every mistake possible and knows how to prevent them. When she notices you hesitating over the placement of a cake, she appears at your elbow, silently repositioning it before moving on. You've learned to appreciate these silent corrections, the way they teach without the need for words. The amphora fills gradually, layer by layer, until only a few inches of space remain at the top. This space is crucial. It will be filled with a sealing mixture that protects the figs from air, from moisture, from the pests that might otherwise find their way into the jar during the long voyage. You watch as the sealer prepares his materials, mixing pine resin with olive oil in proportions that have been worked out over centuries, creating a substance that will harden into an airtight barrier. The resin comes from the forest's inland, collected by tapping pine trees the way you might tap maple trees for syrup. It arrives at the harbor in solid lumps, amber-colored and fragrant, and the sealers grind it before mixing it with warm oil. The smell that results is unmistakable, pine and olive and something else, something ancient that speaks of preservation and protection. When the sealer pours the mixture over the top layer of fig cakes, you watch it flow into the gaps, coating everything, beginning its transformation into a solid seal. Then comes the stopper, a clay disc, slightly smaller than the amphora's mouth, wrapped in fabric and pressed into place. More resin mixture seals around it, and finally a clay cap is fitted over the whole thing, its edges smoothed to create a continuous surface. The amphora is now a sealed unit, its contents protected from everything except time itself. It can be loaded onto a ship, carried across storms, stored in foreign warehouses, and the figs inside will remain as they are, waiting for the moment when someone breaks the seal and releases them. You stand back and look at the row of sealed amphorae, each one representing weeks of labor, months of growth, years of accumulated knowledge. These jars will travel routes that Phoenician sailors have followed for centuries, past islands and along coasts, to ports where the language and customs are completely different from anything in Carthage. And in those ports, people will open them and taste the figs you helped dry, the cakes you helped press, the harvest you helped preserve. The scale of it finally hits you, not just the quantity, though that's impressive enough, but the connections, the way this one city reaches out across the sea to touch distant lives. The figs in these amphorae will be eaten by Greeks and Egyptians and Etruscans, by people who've never seen a fig tree, who have no idea how the fruit grows or how it's dried or how it ended up in their markets. They'll just know that these sweet, dense cakes from Carthage are good, are worth paying for, are worth seeking out when the trading ships arrive. A shout from the harbor draws everyone's attention. A ship has been sighted, one of the regular traders that plies the routes between Carthage and its partners. The packers pause in their work, watching as the vessel maneuvers toward the dock, its sail being lowered, its oars emerging to guide it the last few lengths. This ship will be loaded with amphorae like the ones you've been packing. We'll carry them to whatever port it calls home. We'll begin the process of turning figs into foreign goods. Bamilkau calls the team back to work. There's still much to do, and the ship's arrival doesn't change that. You return to your amphora, reaching for another fig cake, placing it carefully in the growing layer. But part of your attention remains on the harbor, on the ship that's now tying up at the dock, on the sailors who are already shouting questions about the cargo available. The figs you're packing now might go out on that ship, might be loaded within days, might begin their voyage before you've even finished the harvest. The thought gives new meaning to your work. Each cake you place, each layer you build, each seal you watch being applied, all of it is preparation for departure, for the moment when these figs leave Carthage behind and become ambassadors of a sort, representing their city in distant lands. You handle the next cake more carefully than the last, aware that it might travel further than you ever will, might see things you'll never see, might end its journey in the hands of someone whose existence you can barely imagine. By late afternoon, your team has sealed 24 amphorae, a respectable day's work. They stand in rows, waiting for the donkeys that will carry them to the warehouse near the harbor, where they'll join other amphorae in stacks that reach toward the ceiling. From there, they'll be loaded onto ships as space becomes available, dispatched to ports across the Mediterranean in a constant flow of commerce that has made Carthage rich. You stretch your back and look out over the harbor, where the newly arrived ship now rests against the dock, its crew already ashore, its holds empty and waiting. Tomorrow, perhaps, you'll watch as amphorae are loaded onto it, as your figs begin their journey. For now, there's only the satisfaction of work completed, of seals properly applied, of another day's contribution to the great project of turning summer into sustenance that travels. You watch as Phoenician traders barter your figs for Egyptian linen and Iberian metals on the crowded docks, and the scene before you is chaos organized into commerce, 1,000 negotiations happening simultaneously in 12 languages. The harbor at Carthage isn't just a place where ships dock. It's a living organism, a creature of wood and stone and human that pulses with the rhythm of tides and trade winds. You've come down from the packing area to deliver a message, but you find yourself unable to leave, caught up in the spectacle of exchange that transforms your figs into everything else the city needs. The trader you're supposed to find is somewhere in this crowd, but locating him seems impossible among the press of bodies and goods and animals that fills every available space. The ship that arrived yesterday now sits with its holds open, its crew transferring cargo onto the dock under the watchful eyes of Carthaginian officials. You recognize the amphorae being unloaded. They're Egyptian, their shape slightly different from the ones you've been packing, their clay a lighter color that speaks of different sources. These jars contain linen, you've been told, fine cloth that the Egyptians produce better than anyone, that Carthaginian women will pay high prices for. Nearby, another ship is being loaded with the amphorae you helped pack. Your fig cakes are going aboard, carried by longshoremen who seem to think of them as just another cargo, just another set of jars to be stowed in the hold. You feel a small pang of something, ownership, maybe, or pride, as you watch your labor disappear into the ship's dark interior. But the longshoremen don't know you, don't care about the weeks of work represented by each jar. And that's as it should be. The figs have left your hands now. They belong to the traders, to the ship, to the distant customers who will eventually break the seals and taste the summer you helped preserve. The trader you're seeking finally appears, emerging from the crowd with the confidence of someone who belongs here. He's Phoenician, like most of the city's merchants, but his accent marks him as from one of the other Carthaginian colonies, Utica, maybe, or Hadrumatum. He takes the message you've brought, reads it quickly, and then gestures for you to follow him into the heart of the market. You walk among the stalls and temporary counters that have sprung up along the docks, each one piled high with goods from across the Mediterranean. Here are the Egyptian linens, their fine weave almost translucent in the strong light. There are ingots of metal from Iberia, copper and tin, the components of bronze, raw materials that Carthaginian smiths will transform into tools and weapons and art. Beyond them, you see piles of wool from North African herds, baskets of grain from the fertile valleys, jars of wine from Greek islands, and everywhere, the figs of Carthage, your figs, being offered and examined and argued over. The negotiations are performances as much as transactions, each trader playing a role in an elaborate drama of price and value. The Carthaginian merchant you're following approaches a stall where an Egyptian sits surrounded by bolts of linen. They greet each other with the formal politeness of strangers who intend to become business partners, then launch into a conversation that seems to be about everything except the actual transaction. The weather, the health of mutual acquaintances, the political situation in various ports. Only after this preamble do they turn to business. The Carthaginian produces a sample of your fig cakes, offering it to the Egyptian with a gesture that suggests he's bestowing a gift rather than proposing a trade. The Egyptian examines it carefully, turning it in his hands, sniffing it, finally breaking off a small piece and tasting it with the concentration of a scholar studying a text. You hold your breath without meaning to, waiting for his judgment. He nods slowly, and the negotiation begins in earnest. They speak in a mixture of Phoenician and Egyptian and something else, a trading language that's grown up over centuries of commerce, and you catch only fragments, numbers, mostly, and references to quality and quantity and the cost of transport. The conversation goes on for what seems like hours, though probably only minutes pass, and finally they clasp hands in a gesture that signals agreement. Your fig cakes, you realize, have just been traded for Egyptian linen. The transaction happened without you, without any reference to the labor that produced the figs, and that feels right somehow. The figs are just goods now, commodities to be exchanged like any other, their value determined by markets rather than by the sweat that went into them. You're not sure how you feel about this, but you suspect that's the point. The market doesn't care about your feelings, only about the quality of what you've produced. The trader notices you watching and gestures for you to follow him to another stall, where Iberian metals await. Here the negotiation follows a similar pattern. Samples offered, examined, tasted, though you're not sure why anyone would taste metal, and finally agreement reached. More of your fig cakes have been committed, this time for copper that will become bronze that will become who knows what. The chain of transformation stretches out endlessly, each exchange leading to another, your figs traveling through the economy in ways you'll never fully trace. You spend the rest of the morning following the trader through the harbor market, watching as he barters figs for this and that, building the cargo that will eventually fill his ship for the return voyage. By midday, he's traded for linen, metals, wool, grain, and a dozen other goods whose purposes you can only guess at. Your fig cakes have been scattered across the market, exchanged into the hands of traders from half a dozen lands, and you realize with a start that you'll never know where most of them end up. Historians still argue whether the Carthaginian state controlled this trade or whether it was entirely in private hands. The archaeological record shows both state warehouses and private trading houses, suggesting a mixed system where the government took an interest in commerce without fully directing it. From what you're seeing on the docks, the private traders seem to dominate, each one pursuing his own interests, making his own deals, building his own network of relationships across the Mediterranean. The crowd around you has thickened as the day progresses. More ships arriving, more goods being unloaded, more traders crowding the stalls. You've lost track of the merchant you were following, but it doesn't matter. You've seen enough, learned enough, to understand how your figs fit into the larger pattern. They are part of a system that stretches from the orchards of Carthage to the tables of Egypt, from the drying grounds to the foundries of Iberia, from your hands to hands you'll never see. A commotion near one of the ships draws your attention. A dispute of some kind, traders arguing loudly in multiple languages. You can't tell what it's about, but the intensity suggests something important. A disputed quality, maybe, or a disagreement about quantities delivered. The harbor officials move in quickly, separating the parties, beginning the process of mediation that keeps the peace in this crowded space. Without these referees, you realize, the market would descend into chaos, transactions would become impossible, and the flow of goods that sustains Carthage would grind to a halt. You find a spot against a warehouse wall and simply watch, absorbing the spectacle. The harbor at Carthage is the center of the world, or at least of your world, the place where everything comes together and flies apart again. Your figs are here, your labor is here, but they are already dissolving into the larger stream, becoming part of exchanges that will continue long after you've returned to the drying grounds. You watch and you learn and you wonder where you fit into this vast system, and you realize that maybe you don't need to know. Maybe it's enough just to be part of it, just to have contributed something that will travel further than you ever will. You witness priestesses offering the first dried figs to Tarnet, the harvest's blessing given back to the goddess. And this ceremony happens at the great temple on Bursa Hill, far from the commercial bustle of the harbor. You've been invited, or perhaps summoned, because you helped with the pressing, because your hands touch the figs that will be offered, because the gods notice such things even if humans don't. The temple complex sprawls across the summit of the hill, its walls rising white against the deep blue sky, its courtyards opening one into another like rooms in an enormous house. You climb toward it through streets that grow quieter and more sacred as you approach, the noise of the city falling away behind you, replaced by the murmur of prayers and the distant sound of singing. By the time you reach the outer courtyard, you feel like you've entered another world entirely, one where the rules of ordinary life no longer apply. The priestesses who greet you wear robes of white linen, their heads covered, their faces calm with the particular serenity of those who spend their lives in service. They lead you through the courtyards without speaking, their sandals silent on the stone, and you follow like a child being shown something important. In the innermost courtyard, where only a few are permitted, the offering will take place. The figs chosen for this ceremony are perfect. You recognize them from the sorting, the very best of the harvest, the ones that were set aside for this purpose weeks ago. They've been arranged on a bronze platter, their dark skins gleaming in the light of oil lamps, their bloom catching the flames and throwing back tiny sparks of reflected gold. Around the platter, other offerings wait: grain, wine, flowers. But the figs are clearly the center, the reason everyone has gathered. The priestesses begin to sing, their voices rising in harmonies that seem to come from somewhere beyond human throats. You don't understand the words. They are in an ancient form of Punic, perhaps, or something even older. But the meaning reaches you anyway, carried by the music itself. They are thanking, you realize, thanking for the sun that ripened the figs, for the rain that came when needed, for the hands that harvested and dried and pressed. Thanking for survival, for abundance, for the continuing cycle of seasons that brings fruit to the trees and trees to the fruit. The high priestess steps forward, her robes more elaborate than the others, her head crowned with a wreath of fig leaves. She takes the platter of figs and raises it toward the sky, toward Tanit, who watches from somewhere beyond human sight. And she speaks words that echo off the stone walls and seem to hang in the air long after she's finished. Then she lowers the platter and begins the offering itself, placing figs one by one on the altar, each placement accompanied by a prayer you can almost understand. You watch, transfixed, as the figs disappear into the flames. The fire accepts them eagerly, their sugars catching quickly, sending up sweet smoke that carries the offering to the goddess. With each fig consumed, you feel something release in you, the tension of the harvest, maybe, or the worry that has accompanied every stage of the work. The figs are gone now, given back to the source of all abundance, and what remains is gratitude, pure and simple. When the last fig has been offered, the high priestess turns to face the small gathering. Her eyes find you in the crowd, you're sure of it, and she holds your gaze for a long moment before moving on. You've been seen. You realize. You've been acknowledged. Whatever happens next, whatever the rest of the harvest brings, you've been part of this, part of the oldest human response to abundance, giving some of it back. The ceremony concludes with more singing, more prayers, a final blessing that sends everyone back to their ordinary lives. You file out of the inner courtyard with the others, passing through the increasingly less sacred spaces until you emerge again into the ordinary world of streets and houses and the distant sound of the harbor. But something has changed, though you can't quite name it. The world looks the same, but you look at it differently. Historians still argue whether Tanit was primarily a goddess of fertility, of war, of the moon, or of something else entirely. The records are contradictory, the interpretations disputed, the truth lost somewhere in the centuries between then and now. But standing here, having watched figs offered in her name, you understand that the arguments miss the point. Whatever Tanit was, she was real to the people who worshipped her, real enough to receive offerings, real enough to thank for the harvest, real enough to matter in ways that historians can only guess at. You make your way back down the hill toward the drying grounds, where work continues despite the ceremony. The figs don't care about gods, or maybe they do. Maybe the whole process of ripening and drying is itself a kind of offering, a return of sun and soil to the forms that humans can use. You pass a tree heavy with late-season fruit and you pause, reaching up to touch a fig that won't be ready for days yet. It's hard under your fingers, not yet yielding, but you can feel the potential in it, the sweetness that will develop if given time. The offering you witnessed will be repeated across the city, across the countryside, wherever people have harvested and want to give thanks. Some offerings will be elaborate, like the one on Bursa Hill. Others will be simple. A few figs left at a household shrine, a prayer whispered before the evening meal. But all of them will acknowledge the same truth, that abundance isn't something humans create alone, that the sun and rain and soil contribute as much as any labor, that gratitude is the only appropriate response to food that appears on your table. You reach the drying grounds and find your section, your figs, your work waiting for you. But before you begin, you take a moment, just a moment, to look up at the sky, at the sun that powers everything, at the invisible presence of Tanit, or whatever name you want to give to the force that makes figs possible. Then you bend to your work, your hands finding the familiar rhythm, and you offer the rest of your day in the only way that makes sense. By continuing, by preserving, by doing your part in the endless cycle of harvest and thanks. You return at dusk to gather the final batch, the work complete, the scent of dried fruit settling over the quiet city, and this last walk to the drying grounds feels different from all the others. The urgency that has driven you for weeks has faded, replaced by something slower, more reflective, more aware of endings. The figs that remain on the stones are the last of the harvest, The final fruits of a season that has demanded everything and given everything in return. The path from the city to the orchards and drying grounds has become as familiar as your own home. Every turn and slope and stone known to your feet without conscious thought. You walk it now in the fading light, the sun dropping toward the sea behind you, casting long shadows that stretch ahead like fingers pointing toward the future. The air has cooled slightly, the oppressive heat of midday giving way to the gentler warmth of evening, and you breathe deeply, filling your lungs with air that carries the complex scent of drying figs from every direction. The drying grounds appear before you, and they are almost empty now. Where thousands of figs once covered the stones in careful rows, only a few hundred remain, clustered in the sections that ripened latest or required extra time. The workers who tended them through the weeks have mostly gone, their labor complete, their attention turned to other tasks. A few figures move among the remaining figs, making final adjustments, checking for any that might need another day. But the great project is finished. The harvest is in. You walk to the section you've tended throughout the season, and you find your last figs waiting for you. They are beautiful, darker than the early harvest, more concentrated, their surfaces covered with the bloom that signals perfect drying. You kneel beside them and begin the final gathering, your hands moving with the ease of long practice, placing each fig gently into the basket at your side. There's no urgency now, no race against rain or insects or the setting sun. Just the simple satisfaction of completion, of work brought to its proper end. The figs fill your basket gradually, and as they do, you find yourself remembering moments from the weeks behind you. The first morning, waking before dawn, not knowing what the season would bring. The feel of fresh figs in your hands, heavy with moisture, their skins cool from the night. The heat of midday on the drying grounds, the constant vigilance against wasps, the satisfaction of flipping each fig to expose its hidden side. The press in the courtyard, the transformation of loose fruit into dense cakes. The harbor, watching your labor loaded onto ships bound for places you'll never see. The temple, watching figs offered to Tanit, given back to the source of all abundance. All of it has led to this moment, this final gathering in the fading light. You pick the last fig from the stone, a small one, perfect in its way, the stem still attached, and you hold it for a moment before placing it in the basket. This fig, you realize, contains the entire season within it. The sun that ripened it, the rain that swelled it, the hands that picked and dried and turned it, the prayers that accompanied its journey, the hopes that it would survive to feed someone, somewhere, in the months ahead. All of it, concentrated into this small dark fruit that fits in the palm of your hand. You place it in the basket with the others, and you stand, stretching muscles that have learned new ways of moving over these weeks. The drying grounds stretch out before you, empty now except for a few scattered workers finishing their own final gatherings. The stones that have held figs for weeks will soon be bare, waiting for next year's harvest, for the next generation of workers to spread their fruit across the warm surface and begin the process all over again. The sun has nearly reached the horizon, its light turning gold then orange then the deep red that precedes true darkness. You pick up your basket, feeling its weight, lighter than the baskets you carried at the harvest's peak, but somehow heavier with meaning. And you begin the walk back to the city, following the path that has become second nature, your feet finding the way while your mind lingers on the season that is ending. Behind you, the drying grounds disappear into the growing darkness. The stones that held your figs will cool through the night, will wait through the winter rains, will warm again under next year's sun. And next year, new figs will spread across them, new hands will tend them, new harvests will be gathered and dried and pressed and traded. The cycle continues, as it has for centuries, as it will for centuries after you're gone. But for now, for this moment, The work is done. You carry the last of the harvest toward the city where lamps are beginning to flicker in windows, where families are gathering for evening meals, where the scent of dried figs will linger through the winter as a reminder of summer's abundance. You walk slowly, deliberately, making this last journey last, because once you reach the city and deliver these final figs, the season will truly be over. And then you're there, at the edge of the city, where the path meets the first houses and the darkness of the countryside gives way to the warm glow of human habitation. You pause for a moment, looking back toward the drying grounds you can no longer see, toward the orchards where trees are already preparing for next year's fruit, toward the whole vast system of sun and stone and human labor that has occupied you for weeks. Then you turn and walk into the city, carrying your basket of final figs, carrying the season's end, carrying everything you've learned and become through this slow, sun-drenched process of transformation. The courtyard where you'll deliver these last figs awaits, its lamps already lit, the sorters already in position despite the lateness of the hour. You step through the doorway and set your basket down, and Arishat looks up from her work and nods once, acknowledging the completion of something that words can't quite capture. You nod back, and then you're done, truly done. The harvest finished, the figs delivered, the season complete. You step back out into the street and the city wraps around you like a blanket, warm and safe and full of the scent of drying fruit that will probably never leave your clothes or your hair or your memory. You walk home through streets you've known all your life, past houses where families are settling in for the night, past the occasional late traveler hurrying toward their own destination. And when you finally reach your door and step inside and close it behind you, the silence of your own space feels like a gift, like the first moment of rest after weeks of labor. You lie down on your sleeping mat and close your eyes, and behind your lids you see figs, thousands of figs, millions of figs, spread across stones and packed into jars and loaded onto ships and offered to gods. You see the sun that powered it all, the hands that did the work, the city that made it possible. And as sleep begins to take you, you understand that you'll never see figs the same way again, that every dried fig you encounter for the rest of your life will carry within it the memory of this season, this harvest, this slow transformation of summer into sustenance. The city settles around you, its sounds fading one by one until only the distant murmur of the sea remains. Somewhere out there, ships are carrying your figs toward distant shores, toward people who will taste Carthage without ever seeing it. Somewhere, the last of the harvest is being sorted and packed and stored against the winter. Somewhere, the trees are already beginning their long rest, gathering strength for next year's abundance. And here, in this small room in this ancient city, you sleep. You sleep the deep sleep of labor completed, of work accepted and finished, of another season added to the endless cycle of harvest and rest and harvest again. You sleep, and the figs sleep with you, their sweetness stored in jars and in memory, waiting for the moment when someone will break the seal and release the summer one last time. As you drift now, let the image of those ancient stones fade slowly, like the last light leaving a Mediterranean sky. The figs are gathered, the work is done, and the city rests around you in the warm darkness. There's nothing left to tend, nothing left to worry about, nothing left but the deep satisfaction of a season completed and the promise of rest ahead. The scent of dried fruit lingers, but softly now, like a memory rather than a presence. And somewhere in the distance, the sea continues its endless conversation with the shore, a lullaby for a city that has given everything to the harvest and received everything in return.